Hello and welcome to Business Today Television, your Easynomics, and I am your host for the episode today, Siddharth Zarabi. Joining me on the show today is one of India's foremost banking analysts, independent research analyst Hemindra Hazari, who is a SEBI registered analyst. Hemindra, welcome to the show. The CBI, as all of us know, has tightened the screws almost 5 years after the first inquiry was registered in the ICICI Bank Videocon loan case. And these allegations have meant that just 3 days after the arrest of Chanda Kochhar and her husband Deepak, the agency has now arrested Videocon Group Chairman Venugopal Dhoot. This is one of the highest profile arrests of anyone from Indian industry in the recent past. The founder of the Videocon Group, which was at one point a premier electronics and white goods manufacturer, has been taken into CBI custody. And joining me to analyze the implications is Hemindra. Hemindra, I want to start with asking you about what really does this arrest of Dhoot and the Kochhars mean. The Kochhars were arrested in the past by the ED, but this is the first CBI, major action by the CBI in this matter.
I don't think Chanda Kochhar was ever arrested. She was questioned. It was only, if I remember correctly, her husband who was arrested briefly.
Yes.
So I think this is a very important development because a lot of us had forgotten about this case, and we were wondering whether justice would finally be given to Chanda Kochhar or not, because the evidence, as anyone who has an understanding of finance and understands the banking industry, would tell you that the evidence was self-evidentary from day one. So it has taken, the CBI nearly 5 years to arrest her, tells you how things really operate in India. Because if it had been a public sector banker, they would have been abandoned the moment these information was made available to the public, and the police would have arrested the chairman, as we have seen in numerous occasions in the past. But when it comes to the private sector banks, and especially Chanda Kochhar and ICICI Bank, it seems that the arm of the law was very, very long. They said it has taken 5 years for them to have arrested her.
Let's recap some of the key allegations in this case, Hemindra. The allegation is that there has been substantial quid pro quo and that favors were extended in the grant of loans to the Videocon Group and its entities, and that has also led to monetary transaction as well as transactions of property. How would you surmise what you said was pretty much evident as far as this case is concerned?
See, because the whistleblower who first brought out this report in the public domain in 2016 had very carefully documented information, which I think was largely from the public domain, that the timing of the ICICI Bank loan to Videocon, and thereafter the payment that the Videocon entity made to this new power. And you see, if she had at least disclosed the conflict of interest when she was on the credit committee board of ICICI Bank, she may well have escaped, because then this information would not have come out. But she was so confident that nothing, could touch her, that she sat on the board, apparently did not disclose the conflict of interest. And then it became a very straightforward case that definitely there is a conflict of interest when your spouse is dealing with an entity which the bank is giving funds to, and the timing of the funds are such that after you sanction a loan and disperse the funds, a certain amount goes from that entity you have given funds to your spouse's company. So if she had disclosed this, then most likely none of this would have surfaced, and she would have still be ruling the roost in ICICI Bank. But because she was so supremely brazen and confident that nobody could touch her, she sat on the committee which gave the loan, where it was a very straightforward case of conflict of interest.
Mr. Hazari, I recall when I was also reporting on this case from 2016 onwards, and since you spoke about the whistleblower, Arvind Gupta, for the first time in a live television interview, sat down with me where he details many of the points that he had put out in his blog post, which was initially ignored by so many other people in the media. What is at heart here? Because the lawyers for the coachers have been telling the court that there have been inquiries and probes, including perhaps the banking probe by ICICI itself, which had absolved them of any wrongdoing allegations. What is at heart? Because this is a private sector bank. What is at heart of these allegations?
No, the heart is obviously that there's an alleged case of bribery here, that she used her good offices to basically, give funds to a corporate entity, and that there was allegedly a kickback which was given to her via her spouse. So that is very, that is the charge here. And see, one thing you got to note: the private sector operates really with very little accountability for senior officials at the top, and this is particularly in the financial services, as we have seen in the case of Rana Kapoor and ILFS, where both Rana Kapoor at Yes Bank and Mr. Ravi Parthasarathy at ILFS, they virtually ran their own kingdom with no accountability to their board of directors. While in a PSU bank, you have the CVC, there is independent checks and balances. While in the private sector, typically what happens is, even when you have found very senior officials uh, guilty of their own, of corruption, they're very quietly removed and no publicity is given at all, which is not the case in the PSU bank, because in the PSU banks, the CBI is instantly called in and the publicity is given. So the private sector, by and large, operates with very little accountability for its senior officials. And we have seen this very clearly in ICICI Bank, because the board of directors, then led by Mr. M.K. Sharma, who was the former legal head of Unilever, he steadfastly defended Chanda Kochhar's conduct till it became untenable, because by that time, the press had got this news and there was immediately coverage. If you see the way the board of ICICI Bank conducted themselves, showed extremely poor corporate governance standards, because they kept defending her. Even they had hired an internal review by, I think, Dr. Mangaldas Shroff, which had totally exonerated her. It was only when the Sri Krishna report came in that all this evidence came and the board finally decided to send her on leave and subsequently sacked her. And at that point in time, Amarchand Mangaldas and Shroff retracted their report, which is unheard of. So it tells you how the private sector really operates. There is all a cozy club. There is no accountability. And this is an outstanding example of that. Because everyone, once the Sri Krishna report came out, they all decided, yes, now is the time to act. But it was the evidence, was quite self-evidently those who have some idea of finance.
Mr. Hazari, you make a very important point about the cozy club, and it's been called phone banking also during the UPA era. When you talk about this cozy club, the obvious question that everyone wants to know is, what about the others? There have been several cases and a mountain of bad debts which is still being cleaned up, not just in the public sector, but to some extent in the private sector as well. Have things changed as far as this cozy club is concerned?
You see, the cozy club was being really made to ridicule public sector bankers, and they deserve some of that ridicule, because they were doing phone banking, taking oral instructions from politicians and the bureaucrats. In the private sector, it operates in a slightly different form. The CEO takes his oral instructions from anyone, as we can see, because they are all colluding. We have seen this in the case of Rana Kapoor, which brought down Yes Bank. But apparently, that was also the case in ILFS, which brought down ILFS, and it created a huge impact on the financial sector. In the private sector, we all say there is a board of directors and they're full of eminent people, and they will serve as a cross, check and balance. against very aggressive or corrupt CEOs. But sadly, that is not the way it operates in this world because independent directors they feel beholden to either the senior executive who has selected them or to the promoter where there is a promoter. So they do not, in most cases, exercise any kind of independence. And basically, they collude with the CEO or with the promoter. And if anything goes wrong, their defense invariably is that we did not know. But what is actually happening is, in such cases, they deliberately don't want to know. That is, even if some evidence does come up, they will look away or they will exonerate the CEO straight away. And we have seen this exactly play out in Chanda Kochhar's case in ICICI Bank, where the board totally cleared her of any wrongdoings. You had even Mr. N. Vagul, who was retired, was doing the rounds of all the business studios defending Chanda Kochhar's contract. When he had to get business to come out, he has retired. What was the point of him coming there trying to defend Chanda Kochhar and saying how honest she was? So the whole ecosystem, as you see in ICICI Bank's case, was actually protecting Chanda Kochhar.
Uh, Mr. Hazari, what are the larger implications of this arrest? Because while we have discussed what happened in the past and what should have perhaps been done better when it comes to corporate governance and board level supervision as well, what are the larger implications from this arrest?
See, one is that everyone thought that she had gotten away scot-free because no arrest of her had happened. So one is that the big story is why has the CBI arrested her now, and why had they not arrested her early? What has changed now? 5 years after the story first came into the news, that has taken them so long to arrest her. Obviously, something has changed, but the public really do not know what exactly has changed that has made them arrest her. A lot of this information was available also after this news broke. The second is that what exactly happens to such people because we have seen sadly the conviction track record of both the Central Bureau of Investigation and the Enforcement Directorate is abysmally poor. Like most of the people they arrest, they seem to be unable to convict. That means they do not make a very strong case when the case goes to the courts. Now we have to see whether this case will also fall apart like many of the others do, or does it actually go ahead for a conviction? She has
Mr.
been
Haz-
judged by people and even by corporate India, and that is why nobody has even hired her as an independent director after she left ICICI Bank or was sacked by ICICI Bank.
What are the larger points that come out as far as banking supervision and regulation are concerned? Because the RBI had also been asked to look into this matter, and not much had come of that as well.
You see, what you have to see in this case is that, mind you, it was a whistleblower who, to the random act of a whistleblower which first made this news public. In the private sector, there's really no institutional mechanism available, at least until very recently, which allows for an exposure and an expose of senior officials at the level of the CEO, or even one level below. Now, if it had not been for this random whistleblower, nobody would have even known about this case because in the private sector, there is no central vigilance commission which plays an independent role, which has an independent reporting structure. It is only after these cases at Yes Bank and ILFS and even ICICI Bank that the RBI has now institutionalized certain very key senior officials who, apart from reporting to the CEO, will also have an independent reporting to the board. Now, however, we have seen how independent directors on the board actually conduct themselves. So here again, we have to know that independent directors really do not exercise any independence, and they normally go ahead with the CEO or with the promoter. But in the public sector, that's very different because the Central Vigilance Commission, to everyone, most the general feedback in the press is how negative they are. It is really they play a very important role, and it has to be noted that in the Supreme Court judgment, senior private sector bank officials have been found to be public officials because they are handling public money. Therefore, in my opinion, the CVC should now have a closer look and have an institutional mechanism where they can monitor the private banks because the private banks are handling public money.
Okay, that's a interesting point that you make about involving the Central Vigilance Commission. Many would probably want to take issue with that suggestion, but the point that is also being made after the arrest, and these are whispers really, that this will have a chilling impact on the way business is conducted and how banks go about winning business from clients. Do you buy that argument?
I definitely do not buy this argument. The same argument is used when independent directors come under pressure and they said, oh, this will make us very difficult to become independent directors of banks. But the true reality today is that there is a long queue of prospective individuals who want to be independent directors on banks because it's very prestigious. So this, but you see, if you have to, there are certain responsibilities and accountabilities that come along with the post. You as a journalist also have certain responsibilities which you have to accept. And the same is in my case as an independent research analyst. We cannot take the view that, oh, because there are some onerous regulations, no one will join our profession, or that, we will not be able to operate as professionals. This is a very typical kind of boogeyman argument that you use because you don't want any kind of regulation on you. So I really have no sympathy at all for such arguments because the posts that you hold are extremely important posts, and in the end you're managing public money. It is not your own money, and therefore it
Absolutely.
requires extra supervision and extreme punishment if you're found to be corrupt.
One final point, Mr. Hazari, and this is the interesting comparison you draw between the public sector regulatory framework with the CVC and several other sort of spoken and unspoken ways in which the public sector is always under the watch. And we have seen in the past few years where a lot of public sector bankers, former bankers, have faced the heat from the agencies. Many of those probes are still perhaps not fully done. We don't know what has happened to them. But is there a case for the public sector banking side? Because when we talk to them, they say that it hinders the way we do business. Bankers saying that we have so many C's to deal with, the CAG, the CVC, apart from all the tough business environment.
Well, if you're in the business of banking, where you are going to be managing other people's unsecured deposits, plus the banking sector plays such a vital role even in the economy, in the payment system, then there has to be greater regulation and supervision. Now, mind you, even the government is aware of this, and they have modified the system, and we now have the advisory board for banking and financial frauds, where there's an independent committee which is chaired, I think, by an ex-CBC individual. It has a retired police official. So there are other, eminent people. And when such cases come, they decide whether it requires police prosecution or not. And that is a fairly, credible body. So it's not that tomorrow, at the end, at random, some bank, PSU bank or any private sector banker will get arrested. There is today, which is chaired currently by TM Basin, the Basin Committee, which is the advisory board for financial frauds and banking frauds, which takes an independent view, and then they suggest whether the officials, and it can be any official in the PSU banking or PSU insurance or PSU financial institutions, who should be prosecuted. And it's only then that the police will get involved. So you do have an institutional mechanism today in the police space, and it is my fervent appeal that the government seriously considers a similar such mechanism for private banking, private financial institutions, NBFCs, and insurance companies, where you find such misdeeds taking place involving senior officials.
Absolutely, Mr. Hazari. Very clearly, there is some a merit in having a better supervisory as well as regulatory architecture when it comes to preventing a recurrence of phone banking. And the point really is, as far as probes and investigations are concerned, it should not be tariq pe tariq, but action should happen much faster. As far as this present case is concerned, it's taken almost 5 years from the original time when the whistleblower Arvind Gupta went public on his blog to this seminal moment as far as India's banking and corporate nexus is concerned. Mr. Hazari, as always, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Easynomics. We'll be back with more. Do stay tuned in.